The white roses were wilting. Seren Ashby noticed this small, terrible detail as the minutes stretched into an eternity. The carefully arranged bouquet in her trembling hands had been perfect an hour ago, dewy and fragrant, each petal a promise of the life about to begin. Now the edges were browning, curling inward, like something trying to protect itself from harm. She knew exactly how they felt. The Church of St. Crispin's was filled to bursting with the finest families in England. 300 guests seated in polished pews, their whispers rising like smoke toward the vaulted ceiling. 300 witnesses to what was supposed to be the wedding of the season. 300 people watching Seren stand alone at the altar, waiting for a groom who had not come. Perhaps he's been delayed, her mother had whispered 30 minutes ago, her voice tight with forced optimism. The roads from London can be treacherous. Surely any moment now, her father had added 15 minutes ago, though his face had gone the color of old parchment. Now no one was saying anything at all. Seren's wedding gown, a confection of ivory silk and Belgian lace that had cost more than her family could afford, felt like a shroud. The bodice, which had seemed romantically snug during the final fitting, now squeezed her ribs until breathing became a conscious effort. In through the nose, out through the mouth. Don't faint. Don't cry. Don't let them see you break. She could hear them, of course, the whispers that slithered between the pews like serpents. 45 minutes now, isn't it? I heard Lord Corvin was seen leaving London yesterday evening, traveling north. North? But the wedding is... Precisely. The word landed like a blade between Serene's shoulder blades. She kept her spine straight, her chin lifted, her gaze fixed on the stained glass window above the altar, where saints looked down with painted pity. She would not turn around. She would not give them the satisfaction of seeing her face, but she could feel every stare, every pitying glance, and every delighted smirk from those who had never quite believed that plain Seren Ashby deserved to marry a viscount. They had been right, apparently. The church doors groaned open, and Seren's heart lurched with desperate hope. She turned, the wilting roses scattering petals across the altar steps, expecting to see Corvin rushing in with apologies and explanations. Instead, she saw his brother. Theron Vance, the Duke of Thornbury, stood in the doorway like a pillar of carved obsidian. He was dressed in unrelieved black, as though he had come to a funeral rather than a wedding, his dark hair swept back from a face that would have been handsome, if not for the cold assessment in his gray eyes. There was something aristocratic in the sharp line of his jaw, the way he held himself with the unconscious authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed. Those eyes found Seren. She had met the Duke only 3 times during her courtship with Corvin, and each encounter had left her feeling like a specimen pinned beneath glass. He never smiled, rarely spoke beyond what courtesy demanded. Corvin had laughed about it once, calling his elder brother the family gargoyle, with the easy cruelty of a man who had never known true hardship. Now the gargoyle was walking down the aisle toward her, his boots echoing against the stone floor, and every person in the church fell silent. He stopped before her, close enough that she could smell cedar and something darker, like smoke from a fire long burned out. His face revealed nothing. "Miss Ashby." His voice was low, precise, each syllable measured like coins being counted. "I bear a message from my brother. Don't say it. Please don't say it. He will not be coming." The words dropped into the silence like stones into still water. Somewhere behind her, a woman gasped. A man coughed. The whispers erupted into a roar that filled Seren's ears until she could hear nothing but the rushing of her own blood. Her knees buckled. Strong hands caught her elbows, steadying her before she could fall. The Duke's grip was firm, impersonal, but he did not release her. "Breathe," he commanded, and somehow she obeyed. "Where is he?" The question scraped from her throat like broken glass. Where did he go? That is irrelevant now. Irrelevant. Seren's voice cracked. I am standing at an altar in front of 300 people wearing a wedding gown for a wedding that isn't happening, and you tell me it's irrelevant. Something shifted in those gray eyes. Not warmth, exactly. Something harder to name. What I tell you, Miss Ashby, is that my brother is a coward and a fool, and he has placed you in an impossible situation. The Duke's gaze swept across the watching crowd, his expression darkening with what might have been contempt. These people will feast on your humiliation for years. Your family's reputation will not survive the scandal. Your prospects will be destroyed. Each word was a hammer blow, driving the truth deeper into her chest. He was right. She knew he was right. By tomorrow, Seren Ashby would be the cautionary tale mothers whispered to their daughters, the foolish girl who believed a viscount actually loved her. Unless, the Duke said, and Seren's breath caught. Unless? His hands were still on her elbows. His eyes, gray as winter storms, held hers with an intensity that made her pulse quicken. Unless you marry me instead. The world stopped making sense. Seren stared at the Duke of Thornbury, certain she had misheard him. Behind her, the whispers had transformed into outright gasps of shock, but the sound seemed to come from very far away, as though she were underwater and drowning slowly. I beg your pardon, she managed. You heard me clearly, Miss Ashby. His voice remained steady, utterly calm, as though he proposed marriage to humiliated women every day. Marry me. Today. Now. In front of these witnesses. Transform scandal into spectacle, abandonment into opportunity. You cannot be serious. I am always serious. His grip on her elbows tightened fractionally, and Seren became acutely aware of how close they stood, how the heat of his hands burned through the delicate fabric of her sleeves. She searched his face for any sign of mockery, any hint that this was some cruel jest to compound her humiliation. She found nothing but cold, implacable resolve. Why? The question burst from her. Why would you do this? My reasons are my own. That's not good enough. You cannot expect me to marry a stranger without explanation. I can expect whatever I choose. I am offering you salvation, Miss Ashby. The alternative is to walk out of this church alone, past 300 witnesses who will ensure your ruin spreads across England before nightfall. Seren's chest constricted. She thought of her mother, who had wept with joy when Corvin proposed, her father, who had borrowed heavily against their modest estate to fund this wedding, this dress, this desperate grasp at respectability. She thought of the letters that would arrive tomorrow, the invitations that would be rescinded, and the doors that would close forever. My family, she whispered. The debts will be addressed. The Duke said it as though resolving financial ruin was as simple as ordering tea. Your father's obligations will become mine. Your mother and sisters will be provided for. You will want for nothing. It was too much, too sudden, too impossible to process. Seren felt as though she had stepped into someone else's life, someone else's nightmare, someone else's incomprehensible rescue. I don't understand, she said. You barely know me. We've spoken perhaps a dozen words to each other in the entirety of our acquaintance. I know enough. What does that mean? For the first time, a different expression crossed his features. Not warmth, not softness, but something like reluctant acknowledgement. It means, Miss Ashby, that I have observed you for the past 6 months while you endured my brother's courtship. I have watched you navigate his carelessness with grace, tolerate his dismissiveness with dignity, and smile through his casual cruelties, as though they did not wound you. The Duke's voice dropped lower, meant only for her. I know you deserve better than what he offered. I know you are stronger than anyone in this church realizes, and I know that if you walk away from this altar alone, you will spend the rest of your life wondering what might have been. Seren's throat tightened. No one had ever spoken to her like this, seen her like this, laid bare truths she had hidden even from herself. So you're offering me what exactly? A business arrangement? A marriage of convenience? I'm offering you a choice. His gray eyes held hers, unwavering, the only one available to you in this moment. She looked past him at the assembled crowd, saw the vultures circling, eager for blood, saw her mother's tear-streaked face, her father's ashen pallor, and her younger sisters clutching each other in the family pew. She thought of Corvin, who had promised her forever, and then fled without even the courage to tell her himself. She thought of all the years ahead, marked by whispers and pity and closed doors. And then she thought of the man standing before her, cold as marble, but offering her a lifeline nonetheless. If I say yes, Seren said slowly, what happens then? Then we proceed. The Duke glanced toward the vicar, who stood frozen at the altar with his prayer book clutched to his chest. The ceremony continues. The guests witness a wedding. The scandal becomes a sensation, yes, but a favorable one. The jilted bride becomes the Duchess of Thornbury, and no one will dare pity her again. The Duchess of Thornbury. The title felt foreign, impossible, like trying to wear a crown made for another woman's head. And afterwards? Afterwards, you will come to Thornbury Hall as my wife. You will have your own chambers, your own staff, and your own allowance. I will make no demands of you that you do not wish to fulfill. Something passed through his gaze, too quick to identify. I can be a cold husband, Miss Ashby. I will not pretend otherwise. But I will never abandon you at an altar. I will never make you a fool in front of witnesses. That much I can promise. It was not a declaration of love. It was not even a declaration of affection. But standing in the wreckage of her dreams, wearing a gown meant for another man's promises, Serene found that it was enough. Yes, she heard herself say, I'll marry you. The Duke released her elbows at last, and the absence of his touch left her strangely unsteady. Vicar, he said, his voice carrying across the stunned silence of the church. We will proceed. The ceremony that followed would live in Seren's memory as a fever dream, fractured and strange. The vicar, a nervous man named Father Ashmore who had been expecting to marry her to Corvin, fumbled through his prayer book with trembling hands. The liturgy had to be adjusted, names changed, and the special license that had been prepared for one brother hastily amended to accommodate the other. Through it all, the Duke of Thornbury stood beside her like a statue, his presence both anchor and enigma. Serene heard her own voice, as though from a great distance, reciting vows that felt too large for her mouth, to have and to hold, for better or worse, for richer or poorer. The words that should have bound her to Corvin now bound her to this stranger instead, this cold, powerful man who had swept in like a storm and upended everything. His hand was steady when he took hers to slide on the ring, a band of white gold set with a single sapphire. It had belonged to his mother, he murmured, and though it was slightly loose on her finger, it felt strangely right. His skin was warm against her cold fingers, and Seren found herself wondering absurdly if dukes ran hotter than ordinary men. With this ring, I thee wed. His voice never wavered, never softened, but there was weight to the words that made something twist beneath Serene's ribs. Father Ashmore pronounced them man and wife, and the Duke leaned down to press a kiss to her cheek, brief and formal, his lips barely grazing her skin before he withdrew. It was done. Seren Ashby was now Seren Vance, Duchess of Thornbury, and she had no idea what that meant. The reception that followed was mercifully brief. The wedding breakfast had been prepared for a different groom, the seating arrangements made for a different couple, but somehow everything proceeded as though this had been the plan all along. Seren smiled until her face ached, accepted congratulations that ranged from genuine to incredulous, to barely concealed envy, and tried not to notice the way people looked at her husband, because they did look. Everyone looked at Theron Vance, Duke of Thornbury, with the wary fascination reserved for apex predators. He moved through the crowd like a shark through still water, exchanging the minimum required pleasantries, deflecting questions about his brother with icy finality, and never once straying far from Seren's side. "People are staring," she murmured, during a rare moment when no one was demanding their attention. "Let them." His hand rested at her waist, the touch light but proprietary. "By tomorrow, they'll have constructed a dozen romantic narratives to explain today's events. Let them believe whatever fiction brings them comfort. And what's the truth?" He looked down at her, his gray eyes unreadable. "The truth is rarely as interesting as the story." Before she could respond, her mother appeared, fresh tears streaming down her face. "My darling girl," she said, gathering Seren into an embrace that smelled of rosewater and relief. "I don't understand what's happened, but you're safe now. You're protected." She pulled back, clasping Seren's hands. "A duchess. My daughter, a duchess." Seren tried to summon a reassuring smile. "It's rather a lot to take in." "Your Grace." Her mother turned to Theron, dropping into a curtsy so deep it was nearly a genuflection. "I cannot begin to express our gratitude. When he... Madam." The Duke's voice was not unkind, but it brooked no further discussion. "Your daughter has had an exhausting day. I'm sure you understand that we must depart for Thornbury Hall this evening." Of course. Her mother squeezed Seren's hands one final time, her eyes bright with tears, and something that looked almost like awe. "Write to me, darling. Tell me everything." Seren promised she would, though she had no idea what she would say. The carriage that waited outside the church was black and gleaming, pulled by 4 matched gray horses that looked as cold and elegant as their master. A footman in Thornbury livery helped Seren inside, and she sank onto velvet cushions that probably cost more than her entire wardrobe. The Duke settled across from her, his long legs stretched out, his gaze fixed on the passing countryside as the carriage lurched into motion. Silence filled the space between them, heavy and strange. Seren studied her new husband in the fading afternoon light. He was handsome, she supposed, in the way that mountains were handsome. Impressive, forbidding, not something you wanted to get too close to. His jaw was sharp enough to cut glass, his cheekbones severe, his mouth set in a line that suggested smiling was a foreign concept. "You're staring," he said, without looking at her. Heat flooded Seren's cheeks. "I apologize. I was simply wondering what manner of man you've married." Now he did turn, and something that might have been dark amusement stirred in his expression. "A fair question, given the circumstances. You must admit, the circumstances are rather unusual. They are unprecedented." He inclined his head slightly. "And yet, here we are." "Here we are," Seren echoed. She twisted the unfamiliar ring on her finger, watching the sapphire catch the light. "May I ask you something?" "You may ask. Whether I answer remains to be seen. Where is Corvin? Where did he go?" The amusement vanished from the Duke's face, replaced by something harder, colder. "My brother has fled to the continent. Paris, I'm told, though by now he may have moved on. He left a letter explaining that he found himself unable to proceed with the marriage." "Unable?" Seren repeated. "What does that mean?" "It means he is a coward who could not face the consequences of his own choices." Theron's voice was flat, devoid of emotion. "It means he decided that his freedom was worth more than your future, your family's security, or basic human decency." The words should have hurt more than they did. Perhaps the wound was too fresh, too deep for proper pain. Or perhaps some part of Seren had always known that Corvin's charm was merely surface, his promises as substantial as morning mist. Did you know? She asked. Did you know he was going to run? The silence that followed was heavy, weighted with something Seren couldn't name. I suspected, the Duke said finally. My brother has always been skilled at evading responsibility. When he failed to arrive at the church by the appointed hour, I knew. And you decided to intervene. I decided to offer you an alternative. Why? The question that had plagued her since he first spoke those impossible words at the altar. You still haven't told me why. Theron turned back to the window, his profile sharp against the gray sky. Because you deserved better than what he gave you, he said quietly. Because someone needed to act, and no one else would. Because, he stopped, jaw tightening. Because I could. It wasn't an answer. Not really. But something in his voice, some thread of emotion carefully suppressed, told Serene that there was more to this story than the Duke was willing to reveal. The carriage crested a hill, and Serene's breath caught. Thornbury Hall rose from the landscape like something out of a Gothic novel. Gray stone towers pierced the darkening sky, hundreds of windows glittering with candlelight, vast grounds spreading in every direction like a kingdom unto itself. It was beautiful and terrible and overwhelming in equal measure. Welcome home, the Duke said, and Serene heard something in his voice she couldn't quite identify. The carriage wheels crunched on gravel as they approached the main entrance, where a small army of servants had assembled to greet their new duchess. Serene looked at the impossible house, the silent husband, the life that had been thrust upon her without warning or preparation. What had she agreed to? And more importantly, why did the Duke of Thornbury's gray eyes hold shadows that seemed far deeper than mere coldness? The carriage door opened, and Serene stepped into her new life, the questions multiplying with every breath. Thornbury Hall swallowed Serene whole. She had thought herself prepared for grandeur. The Ashby family was not wealthy, but they were gentry, and Serene had attended enough society events to know what fine houses looked like. She had visited Corvin's London townhouse during their courtship, admired its elegant furnishings, its tasteful artwork, its air of casual prosperity. None of it had prepared her for this. The entrance hall alone could have contained her family's entire home. Marble floors stretched in every direction, veined with gray and silver that caught the candlelight from chandeliers that dripped crystal like frozen waterfalls. Portraits of stern-faced Vance ancestors lined the walls, their painted eyes following her as servants materialized from shadowed doorways, forming a receiving line that seemed to stretch forever. Your Grace. A woman stepped forward, tall and spare, her gray hair pulled back in a severe knot. Her black dress marked her as the housekeeper, and her eyes assessed Serene with the clinical precision of a jeweler examining a stone of questionable value. I am Mrs. Ashworth. Welcome to Thornbury Hall. Thank you. Serene's voice sounded thin, inadequate against the vastness of the space. Mrs. Ashworth manages the household, Theron said, his hand settling at her lower back. The touch steadied her, though she couldn't have said why. She will see to anything you require. The Duchess's chambers have been prepared, Mrs. Ashworth continued, her tone professionally neutral. Per His Grace's instructions. Serene caught something in those words, some emphasis she couldn't quite parse. Per His Grace's instructions. What instructions? When had there been time for instructions? But the Duke was already guiding her toward the grand staircase, and she had no opportunity to ask. Her chambers were not chambers. They were a suite, a self-contained world of silk and velvet and polished wood. A sitting room with windows overlooking gardens that disappeared into darkness. A dressing room larger than her bedroom at home, and the bedroom itself, dominated by a four-poster bed, draped in fabric the color of midnight sky, its posts carved with climbing roses and thorns. These were my mother's rooms, Theron said, and something in his voice made Seren turn to look at him. Were. She died when I was 12. They've been closed ever since. He moved to the fireplace, where flames already crackled against the evening chill. I had them reopened for you. The weight of that statement settled over Seren like a cloak. 20 years these rooms had been shuttered, preserved in memory's amber, and he had opened them for her. A woman he barely knew. A wife he had claimed out of obligation, or pity, or some motivation she still couldn't name. She struggled for words. That's very generous. Generosity has nothing to do with it. His voice had returned to its usual coolness. You are the Duchess of Thornbury now. You should have rooms befitting the title. Before she could respond, a knock at the door announced a young woman with copper hair and freckles scattered across her nose like cinnamon. She curtsied deeply, her eyes bright with poorly concealed curiosity. Your Grace, I'm Tanith. I've been assigned as your lady's maid. Assigned by whom? By His Grace, ma'am. This morning. This morning, hours before the wedding. Hours before Corvin had fled, and Theron had stepped in to save her. And yet somehow, preparations had already been made. Seren looked at her husband, questions burning on her tongue, but he was already moving toward the door. I'll leave you to rest, he said. Dinner will be served at 8. Tanith will show you to the dining room when you're ready. Wait. But he was gone, the door closing behind him with a soft click that felt far too final. Seren sank onto the edge of the enormous bed, her wedding gown pooling around her like a silk ghost. The room was beautiful, undeniably beautiful, but it felt like standing inside a painting. Lovely to look at, impossible to touch without leaving smudges. Your Grace? Tanith's voice was gentle. Shall I help you change? There's a nightdress laid out, and I can draw a bath if you'd like. A bath. When had she last had a proper bath? Hot water and scented oils, and time to simply exist? At home, water had to be heated over the kitchen fire, carried up 2 flights of stairs, rationed between 5 people. Yes, Seren heard herself say. A bath would be lovely. As Tanith bustled about, disappearing through a door Seren hadn't noticed, to what proved to be a private bathing chamber with actual plumbing, Seren wandered the sitting room. Her fingers trailed over furniture that probably cost more than her father's debts, over books that looked too beautiful to read, over a writing desk stocked with paper and ink and sealing wax in the Thornbury colors. And then she noticed the dress. It hung in the dressing room, clearly visible through the open door. Not her wedding gown, which lay wilted where she'd dropped it. This was something else entirely. A gown of deep emerald velvet, trimmed with silver embroidery that caught the light like trapped stars. Beside it, slippers to match. A shawl of cashmere so soft it felt like touching clouds. Tanith? Serene's voice came out strange. Where did this come from? The maid appeared in the doorway, a towel over her arm. His Grace had it commissioned, ma'am, last week, for tonight. Last week, before the wedding, before any of this had happened. I don't understand, Seren whispered, but even as she said it, a strange suspicion began to form in her mind. How much had the Duke of Thornbury known? How much had he planned? And what exactly had she married into? Morning arrived with the smell of chocolate and the rustle of curtains being drawn. Seren blinked awake, momentarily disoriented by the unfamiliar ceiling, the too soft bed, the daylight streaming through windows that faced the wrong direction. Then memory crashed over her like a cold wave, and she remembered everything. The altar, the abandonment, the Duke, her husband. Good morning, Your Grace. Tanith appeared beside the bed, with a tray that held a delicate china cup, steam curling from its contents. I've brought chocolate. Mrs. Ashworth says the Dowager Duchess will receive you at 11. Seren sat up slowly, her body aching in strange places from yesterday's tension. The Dowager Duchess? His Grace's grandmother, ma'am. She doesn't live in the main house. She has her own wing on the east side. But she wishes to meet you." Something in Tanith's careful tone suggested this wasn't optional. Of course, Seren accepted the cup, the warmth seeping into her cold fingers. "What should I expect?" Tanith hesitated, clearly wrestling with servant's discretion versus feminine solidarity. Finally, she leaned closer, her voice dropping. "Lady Isolde is particular, Your Grace. She had certain expectations regarding His Grace's marriage. The circumstances yesterday were not what she anticipated." Seren nearly laughed at the understatement. "I imagine not. Just be yourself, ma'am. She respects honesty, even when she doesn't like what she hears." Armed with this dubious reassurance, Seren allowed herself to be dressed in a morning gown of soft rose that she didn't remember seeing in the dressing room last night. More mysterious provisions, more questions without answers. At precisely 11, a footman escorted her through corridors that seemed designed to intimidate, finally depositing her before a door of carved oak that bore the Vance family crest. The room beyond was a study in controlled elegance. Pale blue walls, silver fixtures, furniture that managed to be both delicate and somehow threatening. And at its center, seated in a chair that might as well have been a throne, was Lady Isolde Vance, the Dowager Duchess. She was ancient, perhaps 80, but age had only refined her rather than diminishing her. White hair swept up in an elaborate style, bones sharp beneath papery skin, eyes the same gray as her grandson's, but somehow colder. She wore black silk and pearls, and she examined Seren with the detached interest of a scientist studying an unusual specimen. "So," her voice was surprisingly strong, "you were the young woman who was abandoned at the altar and somehow emerged as Duchess of Thornbury. No greeting, no pleasantries." Serene's spine straightened. "I am." "Sit." Seren sat in the indicated chair, folding her hands in her lap to hide their trembling. "Tell me about yourself, not the polished version you would offer at a dinner party. The truth." It was the last thing Seren had expected. She drew a careful breath. "My father is a gentleman of modest means who made unfortunate investments. My mother is the daughter of a country vicar. We have no great connections, no impressive fortune, no particular claim to significance." She met Lady Isolde's eyes directly. "I was engaged to your younger grandson because he found me tolerable, and my family was too desperate to question his motives. I stood at that altar, believing I was about to secure my family's future. Instead, I was publicly humiliated. And then my other grandson appeared. Yes. Why did you accept him?" The question cut to the heart of everything Seren had been wondering herself. She considered lying, offering some pretty fiction about gratitude or admiration, but Tanith's advice echoed in her mind. "She respects honesty, because I had no other choice," Seren said, "because my family would have been ruined by the scandal, because," she paused, choosing her words carefully, "because he looked at me like I was worth saving." A flash of recognition crossed Lady Isolde's ancient eyes. "Did he know?" "I don't pretend to understand his motives, your ladyship. I don't know why he did what he did. But I know that without his intervention, I would have walked out of that church into a life of whispers and closed doors. Whatever his reasons, I am grateful." Lady Isolde was silent for a long moment, her gaze boring into Seren's with unnerving intensity. "My grandson," she said finally, "has been frozen since his mother died. Longer, perhaps, since his father was never warm to begin with. He has spent 20 years building walls so high that no one can scale them. Not me. Not his brother. Not any of the suitable young ladies I've paraded before him for the past decade." Seren wasn't sure how to respond to this, and then yesterday, Lady Isolde continued, He did something utterly unprecedented. He intervened. He acted. He claimed a bride in the most dramatic fashion imaginable. The old woman leaned forward. "Do you know what I think, Duchess?" "No, your ladyship." "I think my grandson saw something in you. Something that cracked through that ice of his for the first time in 2 decades. I don't know what it was. Perhaps you don't either, yet. But I intend to find out." The words should have felt like a threat. Instead, they felt like something else entirely. Like a puzzle piece Seren hadn't known she was missing. "I have no intention of hurting him," she said quietly, "if that's your concern." "Hurt him?" Lady Isolde laughed, a dry, rasping sound. "My dear girl, I'm not worried about you hurting Theron. I'm worried about what will happen when he finally allows himself to feel something and discovers he doesn't know how to handle it." She rose, signaling the interview's end. "You may be good for him," she said, moving toward the door. "Or you may be a disaster. Either way, it will be interesting to watch." She paused with her hand on the handle. "Welcome to the family, Duchess. Try not to burn it down." The days that followed were strange, suspended things. Seren learned the rhythms of Thornbury Hall, the way morning light filled the east-facing breakfast room, the echoing footsteps in endless corridors, and the particular silence of a house too large for the people who lived in it. She explored when she could, losing herself in galleries and libraries and conservatories filled with exotic plants that seemed impossibly alive against the gray English sky. And she waited for her husband. Theron was a ghost in his own home. She glimpsed him at meals, where they sat at opposite ends of a dining table, long enough to seat 30, exchanging polite observations about weather and estate business, while servants moved silently around them. She sometimes heard his footsteps late at night, passing her door on the way to his own chambers in the opposite wing. He never lingered, never initiated conversation beyond what courtesy required, never touched her again after those steadying hands at the altar. But things appeared. Small things, at first, easily overlooked if she hadn't been paying attention. A book of poetry on her sitting room table, its spine cracked in just the way she liked, with a ribbon marking a particular verse about resilience. A vase of winter roses on her breakfast tray, fresh each morning, though the gardens were barren with frost. A cashmere wrap left over her favorite chair in the library, the precise shade of blue she had admired in a fashion plate, but never mentioned aloud. "Where do these come from?" she asked Tanith one morning, gesturing to the new writing habit that had appeared in her dressing room overnight. Deep burgundy wool, cut to her exact measurements, with jet buttons that gleamed like captured shadows. "I couldn't say, Your Grace." But Tanith's eyes sparkled with knowing. Seren began to watch more carefully. She noticed that the library always seemed to have a fire burning when she arrived, though she kept no regular schedule. That her favorite biscuits, lemon with lavender icing, appeared on her afternoon tea tray, without her ever mentioning her preference. That every room she frequented was somehow warmer, brighter, and more comfortable than it had any right to be. And she began to understand. The Duke of Thornbury was not demonstrative. He did not speak of feelings, or offer compliments, or engage in the small intimacies that most marriages contained. But he watched. He noticed. And in his silent, systematic way, he provided. It was, she realized one evening, as she discovered a first-edition novel she had mentioned wanting to read months ago, before she'd even met Corvin, a form of courtship. Strange and indirect and utterly unlike anything she had experienced, but courtship nonetheless. The realization made something warm unfurl in her chest, something dangerous. 3 weeks after the wedding, Seren found Theron in the library. He sat in a leather chair by the fire, a ledger open on his lap, his dark head bent over columns of figures. He hadn't heard her approach, and for a moment she simply stood in the doorway, watching him. In unguarded moments like this, the ice melted slightly from his features. She could see the exhaustion in the shadows beneath his eyes, the tension in his shoulders, the way his fingers gripped the pen too tightly. He carried something heavy, she thought. Something that bent him even as he refused to break. "Are you going to stand there all evening?" Seren startled. He hadn't looked up, but somehow he had known. "I was trying not to disturb you. Too late." But he set aside the ledger, gesturing to the chair across from him. "Join me." She settled into the offered seat, tucking her feet beneath her, the way she had at home before she'd learned that duchesses didn't sit like schoolgirls. If Theron noticed the informality, he didn't comment. "I wanted to thank you," she said, "for the book, the Radcliffe novel." A subtle change crossed his features. "You found it. It's a first edition. It must have cost a fortune. Money is not a concern. That's not the point." Seren leaned forward. "The point is that I mentioned wanting to read it once, months ago, in passing, to Corvin. And somehow, you knew." The silence stretched between them. The fire crackled. "My brother talked about you," Theron said finally. "During his courtship. Not often and not kindly, but occasionally details emerged. Your preferences, your habits, your history." His jaw tightened. I paid attention. "Why?" He looked at her then, and for the first time, she saw something behind the ice. Something vast and complicated and carefully contained. "Because he didn't deserve you," Theron said quietly. "Because I watched him court you with carelessness and neglect, and I thought—" He stopped, seeming to catch himself. "You thought what?" "It doesn't matter." "It does to me." Another silence, longer this time. When he spoke again, his voice was rough. "I thought that if I ever had the chance, I would do better." The words hung in the air between them, heavier than they should have been. Seren's heart was beating too fast, her breath coming too shallow. "And now you have the chance," she said softly. "Now I have the chance." He held her gaze, and for one impossible moment, the walls came down entirely. She saw loneliness so profound, it ached to witness. Grief that had calcified into something sharp and cold. And beneath it all, barely visible, the faintest flicker of hope. Then he looked away, and the walls rebuilt themselves. "It's late," he said. "You should rest." "Theron." "Good night, Seren." It was the first time he had used her name. The sound of it in his voice, low and careful, made something crack open in her chest. "Good night," she whispered, and left him there by the fire, surrounded by shadows and silence. But as she climbed the stairs to her chambers, she realized something had changed. The ice had fractured, and Seren was determined to find the man beneath. The invitation arrived on a silver tray, its cream-colored envelope sealed with wax, the color of dried blood. "The Marchioness of Pemberton requests the honor of your presence," Seren read aloud, her chest tightening with each word. "A winter ball to celebrate the season. Saturday next." Theron looked up from his breakfast, his expression unreadable. "You don't have to attend." "Don't I?" Serene set down the invitation. "I've been hiding at Thornbury Hall for nearly a month. People are talking, speculating. If I don't appear in public soon, the whispers will only grow louder. Let them whisper. Easy to say when you're not the one they're whispering about." The words came out sharper than she'd intended. She softened her voice. "I need to face them, Theron. I need to show them I'm not ashamed." A glimmer of something, respect, perhaps, or concern, passed through his gray eyes. "Then we'll attend together." The week that followed was a whirlwind of preparations. Madame Fontaine, a modiste of terrifying reputation, descended upon Thornbury Hall with bolts of fabric and an army of seamstresses. By Saturday, Seren had been measured, pinned, adjusted, and ultimately transformed. The gown was a masterpiece. Midnight blue silk that shifted to silver in candlelight, with a bodice embroidered in tiny crystals that caught fire with every movement. It was the most beautiful thing she had ever worn, and as she examined herself in the mirror, she barely recognized the woman staring back. "You look like a duchess," Tanith said softly. "I look like I'm pretending to be a duchess." Perhaps that's how it starts. Tanith fastened a necklace around Serene's throat, sapphires and diamonds, in an antique setting that felt heavy with history. His Grace sent this up. It belonged to his mother. Serene's hand rose to touch the cold stones. His mother's jewels. His mother's rooms. All these pieces of a woman she had never met, given to her as though she deserved them. Theron was waiting at the bottom of the grand staircase, and for one suspended moment, Serene forgot to breathe. He wore formal evening attire, black as always, but somehow different. The severity that usually defined him had been refined into something almost elegant. His dark hair was swept back from his face, emphasizing those sharp cheekbones, that uncompromising jaw. He looked like a fallen angel, beautiful and dangerous and utterly unreachable. Then he looked up and saw her, and something in his expression cracked. "You're—" He stopped, cleared his throat. "The gown suits you." It was possibly the most inadequate compliment in the history of language, and yet somehow, the way his eyes lingered told her everything his words didn't say. "Shall we?" She descended the final steps, her hand finding his offered arm. "Remember," he murmured as they walked toward the waiting carriage, "you are the Duchess of Thornbury. No one in that ballroom is your equal. Act accordingly." Is that how you survive these things? Pretending superiority? It's not pretense, it's fact. The Pemberton estate blazed with light, carriages clogging the drive as the cream of society arrived to see and be seen. Footmen in powdered wigs opened doors, and Serene stepped into a world of crystal chandeliers, champagne fountains, and hundreds of curious eyes. Whispers erupted the moment they were announced. "The Duchess of Thornbury. Did you hear how it happened? Abandoned by one brother, claimed by the other. Quite the scandal. They say she trapped him somehow, used the humiliation to force his hand." Serene's chin lifted. Theron's hand pressed firmly against her waist, steady and warm. "Ignore them," he said quietly. "They're irrelevant." Easy for you to say. You're not the one they're accusing of entrapment. Anyone who knows me knows I cannot be trapped into anything. It was almost a joke. Serene glanced up at him, startled, and caught the faintest hint of amusement in his gray eyes. They made their way through the crowd, accepting congratulations that ranged from genuine to poisonous. The Marchioness herself greeted them with effusive warmth that felt calculated, her eyes darting between them as though searching for cracks in the facade. "Your Grace, how delightful that you could attend. And the new Duchess. My dear, you look positively radiant. One would never guess you'd been through such an ordeal." "What ordeal?" Serene smiled sweetly. "I married a duke. I can think of worse fates." The Marchioness's smile faltered, and beside her, Theron made a sound that might have been a suppressed laugh. They danced the first waltz together, Theron leading her through the steps with the same controlled precision he brought to everything. But halfway through the dance, his hold tightened, his gaze fixed on something over her shoulder. "What is it?" Serene asked. "We have a problem." She turned her head, following his gaze, and her blood turned to ice. Corvin Vance stood at the edge of the ballroom. He looked thinner than she remembered, his golden hair disheveled, his evening clothes slightly rumpled as though he'd dressed in haste. His eyes, those warm brown eyes that had once smiled at her with what she'd believed was love, were fixed on her with an expression she couldn't name. The music continued, but Serene's feet had forgotten how to move. "Keep dancing," Theron commanded, his voice low and urgent. "Don't let him see that you're affected. He's here. He came back." "Yes. Did you know?" "No." The word was clipped, furious. "I would have prevented it if I had." The waltz ended, and before Seren could escape to the safety of the crowd, Corvin was there, materializing in front of them like a ghost she couldn't outrun. Seren. Her name in his mouth felt wrong now, contaminated. I need to speak with you. You have nothing to say that she wishes to hear. Theron stepped forward, placing himself between them like a shield. Leave. Now. This doesn't concern you, brother. She is my wife. Everything concerning her is my concern. Corvin's face twisted. Your wife? Yes, I heard about your gallant rescue. Very noble, Theron. Very convenient. Tell me, did you plan this? Did you orchestrate my absence so you could swoop in and claim her yourself? You're delusional. Am I? Corvin's voice rose, drawing attention from nearby guests. You always wanted what I had. The attention, the charm, the ability to actually live instead of hiding behind your ledgers and your duties. And now you have her. I am not a possession to be had, Seren said, her voice cutting through their confrontation. Both brothers turned to look at her. You left me at the altar, Corvin. You fled without a word, without explanation, without the basic decency of facing me yourself. Whatever claim you believed you had on me died in that church. Seren, please. Your Grace, she corrected coldly. We are not intimates anymore, Lord Corvin. We are nothing. She took Theron's arm, her fingers digging into his sleeve. Take me home, she said quietly. Please. I can't stay here. He covered her hand with his own, and without another word to his brother, led her toward the exit. But as they departed, Seren heard Corvin's voice, low and venomous, carrying across the ballroom. This isn't over, brother. Not even close. The carriage ride back to Thornbury Hall was silent, but the silence was different this time. Charged, electric with unspoken words. Serene stared out the window at the dark countryside, her mind racing. Corvin was back. Corvin wanted something. Her. Revenge. Absolution. She couldn't tell which. And Theron. She looked at her husband, sitting rigid across from her, his jaw clenched so tightly she could see the muscle jumping beneath his skin. What did he mean? She asked quietly. When he said you always wanted what he had? Corvin says many things. Most of them are lies. That's not an answer. Theron's eyes met hers, and for a moment, she saw something raw beneath the ice. Something wounded. My brother and I have never understood each other, he said finally. He was born charming, easy. People loved him without him having to try. I was born. He gestured vaguely at himself. This. Cold. Difficult. Our father favored him. Our grandmother despaired of me. I learned early that I would never be what they wanted, so I stopped trying. That sounds lonely. It was efficient. But the word rang hollow. They arrived at Thornbury Hall, and Theron helped her down from the carriage with the same formal courtesy he'd shown since their wedding. But when she turned toward the house, his hand caught her elbow. I should warn you, he said quietly. Corvin will not give up easily. He has always believed he's entitled to whatever he desires, and he's never learned to accept denial gracefully. What do you think he wants? I don't know. Perhaps he's realized what he threw away. Perhaps he simply cannot stand that I have something he doesn't. Theron's grip tightened fractionally. Either way, I won't let him hurt you again. Why? The question that had haunted her since the altar. Why do you care so much? You barely knew me when you offered marriage. You still barely know me. I know enough. That's what you said before. It's not an answer. He released her arm, stepping back, the walls rebuilding themselves in real time. It's the only answer I have. He strode into the house without looking back, and Seren was left standing in the cold darkness, more confused than ever. The days that followed were tense. News traveled fast in society, and the confrontation at the Pemberton Ball became the scandal of the season. Letters arrived daily. Some sympathetic, most merely curious, all hungry for details Seren refused to provide. Lady Isolde summoned her on the third day. "I hear there was excitement at the ball," the old woman said without preamble. "My younger grandson has returned to make trouble." "It would seem so." "And what do you intend to do about it?" Seren blinked. "I wasn't aware there was anything I could do. Corvin will do as Corvin wishes." "Will he?" Lady Isolde's ancient eyes narrowed. "Let me tell you something about my grandsons, Duchess. Corvin is weak. He has always been weak. Charming, yes, but without substance. He craves attention, approval, the easy adoration of others. When that's denied him, he crumbles. And Theron? Theron is strong. Too strong, perhaps. He has armored himself so thoroughly that he's forgotten there's a man beneath the metal." Lady Isolde leaned forward. "He needs someone to remind him. I thought, perhaps, you might be that someone. I barely know him. He won't let me close enough to know him." "Then push harder." The old woman's voice sharpened. "Do you think love simply happens? That connection falls from the sky like rain? It takes work, Duchess. Persistence. The willingness to crack through walls even when it hurts. And if the walls won't crack, they will." Lady Isolde smiled, and for the first time there was warmth in it. "I've watched him with you. He's different. Lighter. The ice is melting, whether he wants it to or not. Don't let Corvin's return freeze it solid again." That evening, Seren sought Theron in the library. She found him at his usual chair, ledger open, and firelight casting shadows across his face. But tonight, something was different. He looked up when she entered, and instead of dismissing her, he set the ledger aside. "I was hoping you'd come," he said quietly. The words stopped her in her tracks. "You were? I owe you an apology for walking away last night. For being," he searched for the word, "difficult. You're always difficult." "Yes, but usually I'm not rude about it." He gestured to the chair across from him. "Sit. Please." She sat, watching him carefully. There was something different about him tonight, an openness she hadn't seen before, as though the confrontation with Corvin had shaken something loose. "My brother accused me of wanting what he had," Theron said slowly. "He wasn't entirely wrong." Seren's breath caught. "What do you mean?" "I watched you during his courtship. I told myself it was curiosity, nothing more. But the truth is," he stopped, jaw tightening. "The truth is that I envied him. Not just for his charm or his ease with people, but for you. For the way you smiled at him. For the way you tried so hard to make him happy, even when he didn't deserve it. Theron, I'm not good at this." His voice was rough. "I don't know how to say what I feel. I've spent my entire life learning not to feel anything at all. But when I saw you at that altar, abandoned and humiliated, I knew I couldn't let you walk away. Not because of duty or honor, because the thought of you leaving that church without me was unbearable." Silence fell between them, heavy with revelation. "What are you saying?" Seren whispered. "I'm saying." He met her eyes, and the walls were crumbling now, falling piece by piece. "I'm saying that I didn't marry you out of pity or obligation. I married you because I wanted to. Because you're the only person who's ever made me want to be something other than ice." Seren couldn't breathe. The words hung in the air between them, too large to comprehend. She had spent weeks trying to understand this man, trying to decode his silence and his gifts and his careful distance. And now, suddenly, he was laying everything bare. "You wanted to marry me?" she repeated slowly. "You planned for it. The dress, the room, the ring. You knew Corvin would run. I suspected." His voice was steady, but she could see the tension in his shoulders. "I hoped I was wrong, but I prepared nonetheless." "Why didn't you tell me? What would I have said?" Don't worry, Miss Ashby. I've been watching you for months, and I've arranged an alternative wedding in case my brother abandons you." He laughed, but there was no humor in it. "You would have thought me mad, or predatory, or both. I might have thought you cared. I do care." The words came out fierce, almost angry. "That's the problem. I care too much. I've spent 20 years not caring about anything. And then you appeared. And suddenly," he broke off, turning away. Serene rose from her chair and crossed the space between them. He tensed when she touched his arm, but he didn't pull away. "Look at me," she said softly. He turned, and she saw it all. The fear, the longing, and the desperate hope he'd been trying to hide. "I'm not going anywhere," she said. "Not because I have to stay, but because I want to. Because somewhere in the past few weeks, between the gifts and the silence, and the way you always seem to know exactly what I need," her voice caught, "I started to fall in love with you." His eyes widened. "Seren, I know it's complicated. I know Corvin is out there, waiting to cause trouble. I know your grandmother is watching us like a hawk, and society thinks I trapped you, and nothing about this is how it's supposed to be." She reached up, touching his face, feeling him shudder beneath her fingers. "But I don't care. I want this. I want you. You don't know what you're asking for." His voice was hoarse. "I'm not. I don't know how to be what you deserve. Then learn. We'll learn together." He kissed her. It wasn't gentle or careful. It was desperate, hungry, all the emotion he'd been suppressing pouring out in a single moment. His hands tangled in her hair, pulling her closer, and she went willingly, wrapping her arms around his neck as the world fell away. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, his forehead rested against hers. "I love you," he said, and the words sounded like they'd been torn from somewhere deep inside him. "I've loved you since the moment I saw you trying not to cry during one of Corvin's interminable dinner parties. I've loved you in silence and desperation and complete certainty that you would never be mine. And now, I am yours." She kissed him again, softly this time. "And you are mine." They stood there in the firelight, wrapped in each other's arms, and Seren felt something she hadn't felt since before the altar. Hope. Happiness, Seren discovered, was a fragile thing. For 3 perfect days, Thornberry Hall transformed. Theron emerged from behind his walls, tentative at first, then with growing confidence. He showed her his mother's garden, dormant under winter snow, but somehow still beautiful. He read poetry to her in the library, his voice low and sure. He held her hand during meals, no longer sitting at opposite ends of the endless table, but side by side, close enough to touch. Lady Isolde observed these developments with satisfaction, poorly disguised as indifference. Tanith practically glowed with romantic fervor. Even Mrs. Ashworth's severe expression softened into something approaching approval. And then Corvin returned. He didn't come alone. Seren was descending the main staircase when the footman announced visitors. She looked up to see Corvin striding into the entrance hall with a woman on his arm, a golden-haired beauty in expensive silk, her smile sharp as a blade. "Sister-in-law!" Corvin spread his arms wide in theatrical greeting. "How lovely to see you again. Allow me to introduce Lady Cressida Hartwell. She's been dying to meet the woman who stole my brother's heart." Lady Cressida's eyes swept over Serene with calculated disdain. "So, this is the infamous Duchess. How quaint." "You were not invited here," Seren said, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "I don't require an invitation. This is my family home." Corvin's smile was sharp. "Or have you forgotten that you're the interloper here, not me?" "What do you want, Corvin?" "Want?" He affected innocence. "I simply wanted to congratulate my brother on his hasty marriage. And to warn you, dear sister, about what you've gotten yourself into. Warn me. Theron doesn't love you." Lady Cressida's voice dripped with false sympathy. "He doesn't know how. He married you out of guilt and obligation, and when the novelty wears off, you'll find yourself alone in this mausoleum while he retreats to his precious duty. You know nothing about my husband." "Don't I?" Lady Cressida moved closer. "I've known Theron since we were children. I've watched him shut out everyone who ever tried to reach him. You're not special, Duchess. You're just the latest in a long line of women who thought they could thaw the ice." The words hit like physical blows, finding every insecurity Serene had tried to bury. "Get out!" Theron's voice cracked through the hall like a whip. He descended the stairs with fury radiating from every line of his body. Serene had never seen him like this, hot instead of cold, rage burning through his careful control. "Brother." Corvin's smile never wavered. "How lovely to see you. You are not welcome here, either of you. Leave now, or I will have you removed." "So protective." Lady Cressida's laugh was mocking. "How sweet. But tell me, Theron, does she know the truth? Does she know why you really married her?" Something cold slithered down Serene's spine. "What truth?" "Don't," Theron started, but Corvin cut him off. "Our father's will," Corvin said triumphantly. Theron had to marry before his 35th birthday, or forfeit control of half the Thornbury estate. To me. He spread his hands. "You were convenient, Duchess. Nothing more. A solution to a legal problem." The world tilted beneath Serene's feet. "Is this true?" she whispered, turning to Theron. His face had gone pale. "It's not. There's more to it than—" "Is it true?" "Yes." The word fell like a stone. "But Serene, please, let me explain." She didn't hear the rest. She was already running up the stairs, away from the triumphant smile on Corvin's face, and the devastating truth she should have seen all along. She locked herself in her chambers and didn't emerge for the rest of the day. 3 days of silence. 3 days of meals sent back untouched. 3 days of Theron knocking at her door, his voice increasingly desperate, while Serene stared at the ceiling and wondered how she could have been so foolish. Of course there had been another reason. Of course his dramatic rescue had served his own purposes. The gifts, the attention, the careful courtship, all of it had been manipulation, designed to keep her compliant while he secured his inheritance. Except the gifts had started before the wedding, before she'd even known Corvin would flee. The room had been prepared, the dress commissioned, the arrangements made, not to trap her, but to save her, as though he'd been planning for the possibility all along. And the things he'd said in the library, the way he'd looked at her, the trembling in his hands when he finally allowed himself to touch her. Could all of that have been a lie? On the 4th morning, Tanith arrived, not with breakfast, but with a letter. "His Grace asked me to give you this," he said, her voice caught. "He said if you don't want to see him after you read it, he'll understand. He'll make arrangements for you to return to your family with a generous settlement. He won't contest it." Serene took the letter with trembling hands. "Serene, Corvin told you the truth about the will. I cannot deny it. My father, in his infinite wisdom, decided that I needed motivation to marry, and so he created a deadline that would transfer half my inheritance to my brother if I failed to wed before my 35th birthday. But here is what Corvin didn't tell you. The deadline was 3 months away when you stood at that altar. I had time. I could have found someone else, someone suitable, someone appropriate, someone who wouldn't complicate my carefully ordered life. I chose you, not because you were convenient, not because you were desperate, not because I needed a wife and you happened to be available. I chose you because I had watched you for 6 months and fallen helplessly, hopelessly in love with a woman engaged to my brother. I chose you Because when I saw you standing there, abandoned and humiliated, I knew that if I didn't act, I would spend the rest of my life regretting it. The will gave me an excuse, a justification that let me pretend I was being practical rather than admitting the truth, that I would have married you regardless, that I would have married you if it cost me everything. I should have told you. I was afraid that if you knew there was a practical reason for my proposal, you would never believe the emotional one. I was wrong. You deserved the truth from the beginning, and I failed you. For that, I am sorrier than I can express. If you want to leave, I won't stop you. I'll provide for you, ensure you're comfortable, and make certain you never want for anything. But if there is any part of you that believes what we had was real, if you can find it in your heart to give me another chance, then come to the garden at sunset, the place where my mother's roses sleep. I'll be waiting. I'll wait as long as it takes. Yours, in whatever way you'll have me. Theron. Saren read the letter 3 times. Then she dressed, walked to the door, and unlocked it. The garden in winter was a study in waiting. Bare branches traced dark lines against the fading sky. Snow dusted the ground like scattered diamonds. And there, standing among the sleeping roses, was Theron. He turned when he heard her footsteps, and the hope and fear in his eyes nearly broke her heart. "You came," he breathed. "You thought I wouldn't? I thought," his voice cracked, "I thought I'd finally destroyed the only good thing that ever happened to me." Saren crossed the distance between them and took his hands in hers. They were ice cold, as though he'd been standing there for hours. "I'm still angry," she said quietly. "You should have told me, from the beginning." "I know. But I understand why you didn't, and She took a shaky breath. "I believe you, about all of it." "You do? The dress you commissioned before the wedding, the room you prepared, the way you knew my favorite biscuits before I'd ever set foot in this house." She squeezed his hands. "You weren't planning a convenient marriage, Theron. You were planning to save me. Whatever excuse you needed to justify it." He pulled her into his arms, holding her so tightly she could barely breathe. "I love you," he said against her hair. "I love you more than duty, more than inheritance, more than anything I've ever known. Please don't leave. Please stay." "I'll stay." She pulled back enough to meet his eyes. "But no more secrets. No more walls. If we're doing this, we're doing it together. Whatever you want. Anything." She kissed him then, soft and sweet and full of promise, and somewhere in the frozen garden, surrounded by his mother's sleeping roses, Saren finally felt like she was home. Spring arrived at Thornberry Hall like a benediction. The gardens exploded into color, his mother's roses blooming in shades of pink and cream and deepest red. The air softened, the days lengthened, and Saren found herself falling in love with her new home all over again. Corvin and Lady Cressida had been banished from Thornberry lands. Lady Isolde, upon hearing what had transpired, had delivered a tongue-lashing so severe that even the servants spoke of it in whispers. The will's conditions had been met, the inheritance secured, and Theron had immediately set about transferring a portion of the estate into Saren's name, a gesture she'd tried to refuse and he'd insisted upon. "It's yours," he'd said firmly. "You earned it. You stayed when you had every reason to leave." The invitation to the spring ball at the Marchioness of Pemberton's estate arrived in early April. Saren held it up with a raised eyebrow. "Do we have to?" "We should." Theron pulled her close, pressing a kiss to her forehead. "Let them see us. Let them see that their whispers didn't break us." She wore the sapphires that night, his mother's sapphires, and a gown of silver silk that made her feel like starlight given form. Theron watched her descend the staircase with an expression that still made her pulse race, even after months of marriage. "Beautiful," he said simply, and offered his arm. The Pemberton estate was exactly as she remembered, glittering, overwhelming, and full of people who watched and whispered and judged. But this time, when they were announced, the whispers were different. Have you seen how he looks at her? Like she hung the moon. I heard he transferred half the estate into her name. Unprecedented. The Dowager Duchess apparently adores her, called her exactly what the boy needed. They danced the first waltz, and the second, and the third, until Seren was breathless and laughing and happier than she'd ever been. And when Corvin appeared at the edge of the ballroom, because of course he did, unable to stay away from drama, Theron simply raised an eyebrow and led Seren in the opposite direction, dismissing his brother without a word. "You're getting better at ignoring him," Seren observed. "I have better things to focus on." He pulled her closer. Much better things. 1 year later, the Church of St. Crispin's looked different in sunlight. Seren stood at the altar once more, but everything had changed. The pews were full of people who loved her. Her mother, tearful and proud. Her father, healthy again with debts long settled. Lady Isolde, pretending indifference while dabbing at her eyes with a lace handkerchief. And beside her, Theron. "Are you sure about this?" he asked quietly. "Absolutely." It had been her idea. A vow renewal, exactly 1 year after the day that had shattered and remade her life. A chance to stand at this altar by choice, to speak promises she had once recited in shock and desperation. "I, Seren, take you, Theron, to be my husband," she said when the moment came. "Not because I must, but because I choose to. Not because you saved me, but because you love me. Not because circumstance forced us together, but because I cannot imagine my life without you." His gray eyes glistened. "I, Theron, take you, Seren, to be my wife, the woman who saw through my walls and decided I was worth knowing, the woman I will love until my last breath and beyond." He kissed her, and the congregation applauded. Later, in the garden, surrounded by roses in full bloom, Theron held her close. "Happy?" he murmured. "Blissfully." "Even though you're stuck with a cold, difficult duke?" she laughed. "You're not cold anymore. You never were, really. Just waiting for someone to notice." "You noticed." "I did." She kissed him softly. "And I'm never letting go." They swayed together in the afternoon light, surrounded by his mother's roses and the promise of years to come. She had been abandoned at the altar. She had married his cold, powerful brother, and he had never stopped spoiling her. Some love stories, Seren thought, don't begin with "once upon a time." Some begin with disaster and end with dancing in the roses.